Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, this video is going to be about Lord Jamar's response to Eminem. Now, Eminem put out this song called Fall. And in this song, he disses a whole bunch of MCs. And one of those MCs is Lord Jamar. And the reason why he goes after Lord Jamar is because for quite some time, Lord Jamar has been doing interviews on Vlad TV and on his own podcast where he talks about Eminem, basically pointing out that Eminem is like a culture vulture, pointing out how people that are non-white are nothing but guests in the house of hip hop since hip hop was founded by black people, basically talking about how Eminem is overrated, because he's white. This is what he's basically saying when you boil down like his key arguments to their essence. So in response, you have Eminem put out this diss track where he's saying several things about Lord Jamar, and Lord Jamar provides his response. First thing that Lord Jamar says is that he doesn't think that this diss really measures up to Eminem's standard lyricism. Eminem is known for being a master lyricist, being able to, have the most lethal kind of bars and all that kind of stuff. He's known for battle rap. He's known for dissing people and putting out, hardcore diss songs and all that kind of stuff. But as Lord Jamar points out, he mainly goes after soft targets. Like on his first album, he went after like pop stars, people like Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and all that kind of stuff. Soft targets, targets that aren't going to respond. He went after Mariah Carey. Of course, she's not going to be able to respond to him with any kind of hardcore lyrics or anything like that. So that's the situation. So he put out this diss song, and Lord Jamar also went through the lyrics and broke it down step by step by providing a response. And I'm going to read some of the lyrics, and I'm going to tell you some of the things that Lord Jamar had to say. First of all, in this rhyme, Eminem says this. He says, as far as Lord Jamar, you better leave me the hell alone. And then Lord Jamar basically says that's like a bitch type of bar because he's basically saying, leave me alone. Like he's in a position of weakness. Then he goes on to talk about, I'll show you an Elvis clone. So Lord Jamar pointed out the fact that this man is throwing out this whole term of Elvis and all that kind of stuff is deeply problematic. It's deeply problematic for any black person to be rallying behind a man who's basically glorifying his connection to Elvis. Elvis is notorious, is known for stealing the music of black artists and getting credit for it. Culturally appropriating black music and getting rich off of it. That's what Elvis is known for. So here you have Eminem flaunting this, flaunting a person who's known for stealing black music and basically saying that, joking about being a clone of that person. And, for any black person to be, down with that and think that's a hot verse, I mean, something's wrong with you. Then he goes on to say this, I walk up in this house you own, thrust my pelvis bone, use your phone, and go fetch me the remote. And he's telling, Lord Jamar to fetch him the remote. And that's one of the things that Lord Jamar pointed out. He pointed out how to tell somebody to fetch something is like equated to slavery, like how the slave master would tell the slave to go get something for him, to fetch something for him. And the term fetch is a term that people use towards their dogs. They have a bone or a shoe, they throw it and have the dog go fetch it. They say, fetch, boy, and the dog goes and grabs that object and brings it back to his master. It's demeaning and degrading. And you could say that it's a racist type of bar. It's racially suggestive, it's racially insensitive. And it does harken back to a time when black people were subservient to white people, where black people did, in fact, have to fetch things for Mr. Charlie, for the damn white man and stuff like that. And it's just a shame that you have somebody that has appropriated black culture, learned from black people, and then they had the nerve to disrespect black people. And then he's talking about how he's in somebody else's house, which is the house that black people built. Hip hop is something that black people built. And he's talking about how he's making himself at home, like he belongs there. That's his home. And he's talking about don't tell him about the culture, even though he is a guest in this house of hip hop, just like any other non-black person. Hip hop was founded by black people. Even though you had people of other races involved in the early stages, black people created hip hop. Black people are at the core of hip hop. And if you can't acknowledge that, if you can't acknowledge the founders, then you don't deserve to be welcome in that house. If you can't acknowledge the owners of the house, you don't deserve to enter the house. So he goes on to say this in this rhyme. He also calls Lord Jamar a clown. He says, I belong here, clown. Don't tell me about the culture. So he's calling Lord Jamar a clown. And Lord Jamar points out this. He says, first of all, I'm not a clown. You don't see me dressed up in outfits and all that kind of stuff. And then he showed images of Eminem dressed up like a woman, Eminem dressed up like Robin, from Batman and Robin. Eminem basically acting and looking like a literal clown. So Eminem is the last person to call anybody a clown. And that's something that Lord Jamar points out, and I co-sign that. So Lord Jamar also went on to talk about this aspect of what Eminem had to say. Eminem said that I inspired the Hopkins, the Logics, the Coles, the Shawns, the K-Dots, the 5 9s, and I brought the world 50 Cent. Now, Lord Jamar basically said, well, he doesn't really rock with those people and all that. Like, Lord Jamar doesn't rock with those people. He doesn't rock with a K-Dot and, all that, and Cole and all that kind of stuff. But he did acknowledge that J. Cole and Kendrick have skills and stuff like that. And he does appreciate them as artists, but he doesn't really see them as like the soundtrack that he listens to. Like, they're not the soundtracks of his life. He cited other artists. And really, I think that's a form of hateration, man. Really, in this age, J. Cole and Kendrick are at the top of their game. Like, they're some of the best lyricists out now. But, this whole thing about inspiration is another thing that Lord Jamar talked about. He said, well, if you can take credit for inspiring those people, you need to take credit for inspiring people to get hooked on opioids. Lord Jamar presented this chart which indicated like how many times these different artists talk about drugs and opioids. And they said that this chart basically pointed out how Eminem was one of the people that did it the most, more than many other rap artists. So he has basically encouraged a whole generation to start talking about and romanticizing and celebrating drug use and drug abuse. I know that before Eminem, like, I didn't hear many people singing about using all these pills and all that kind of stuff. But after him, it became popular. Now you got songs where people are singing about Percocet and all this other stuff, all these other toxic opioids that are being like glamorized and celebrated and romanticized and all that kind of stuff. So if he can take credit for the Kendricks and the Coles and all that stuff, he needs to take credit for the toxic things that he has contributed to the hip hop culture. So that's something that Lord Jamar points out. And I think that that's a valid point. But at the same time, I think that if Lord Jamar is going to complain about that, he also needs to complain about these other artists that celebrate selling crack in the community, celebrate death and destruction in the black community, celebrate killing people, celebrate misogyny and disrespect and disregard of black women. If you're going to condemn the stuff that Eminem has done, this, perpetuation or promotion of the drug abuse and all that kind of stuff, you have to call out the same things among black artists. And that's something that Rod Digger pointed out that's valid. Now, I want to touch on a couple of other points that Lord Jamar made. And one of those points like really highlighted this issue about the house of hip hop. He talked about how Eminem's statements about how he's basically going to make himself at home in somebody else's house reflects like a devilish mentality. He's a five, Lord Jamar is a 5%er, so he believes in the white man is the devil and the Yakub history and all that kind of stuff. And he basically says that reflects a devilish mentality. Like when you look at what white people have done worldwide in terms of colonialism, in terms of taking the land of others and killing the occupants of that land, you see that this is like sort of analogous to that situation where you have this outsider come into a black home and dominate it, be proclaimed to be the leader of it, being proclaimed to be all this and all that. And that just brings me to a point, like I've said before, like Eminem, I'm not one of these people that will say, well, he doesn't have any skills or he's whack or anything like that, or he doesn't have lyrics and all that kind of stuff. He is a great lyricist. But there are so many black rap artists that are just as good or better. But because we live in a society where they teach you that the white man is all this and that, that the white man's ice is colder, that the white man is better and all this and that, I think that people tend to overrate this guy. They tend to hype him up more than he is. They put him on a pedestal. And in the big scheme of things, he's not that much better than many rap artists. In fact, again, there are so many artists that are equal or better than him. I could just name a few off the top of my head. You got Black Thought, you got MF Doom, you got Nas, Jay-Z, Biggie, all these other people. It's so many people that are just as good or better than Eminem. But because of the color of their skin, they're not getting the same kind of hype. They're not being blown up and put on some pedestal the way he is. And because of his appeal to that white audience, he's able to automatically sell more than a lot of these artists. Now, I want to talk about a couple of things that they touched on before I close out. I only got 15 minutes on here. So one thing that Lord Jamar talked about was like the sound versus the style. He said that like style alone is not enough to make somebody a great artist. It's also about the sound of somebody's voice. And he said that he can't stand the way Eminem sounds. And then he played that parody of Eminem where you had this guy talking about Flanagan, Blamagan, Hamagan. And that stuff was so hilarious, man. He kept playing that throughout the interview. For those of you who haven't seen Lord Jamar's interview, I'll put it in the description box. But basically, he's saying he don't like Eminem's voice. So even though Eminem has all these lyrics, the sound of his voice is irritating. And I don't feel that way about Eminem. I'm fine with his voice. His voice is not a problem for me, like just as somebody that listens to hip hop. But there are artists that have great skills, but I just don't like their voice like that. Their voice irritates me, so I'm not feeling their rhymes that much. So I get what he's saying with that. And then also he talked about this whole thing of style versus having a feeling or feeling somebody's music. He talked about how some artists may be more simplistic in their rhyme style, but you can feel their music. And I understand what he's saying. Like he mentioned Scarface, for instance. Like even though Scarface's rhymes are not as complex as an Eminem or even an MF Doom, his rhymes, you can feel them. Just like a Tupac. A lot of people will say, well, Tupac couldn't rhyme. He wasn't as good a lyricist as a Biggie or even a Jay-Z. But Tupac, you could feel his rhymes when he talked about Brenda's Baby, when he talked about Dear Mama, when he even did his diss songs like Hit 'Em Up and Against All Odds. You could feel it, man. And that's part of the charisma that goes into hip hop. Hip hop is in part about charisma, and charisma is a big factor. The last thing I want to touch on is this whole wordplay versus substance. Somebody can have clever wordplay, but they're not talking about a subject that you can relate to. And that's kind of like what Lord Jamar was saying. He was saying like Eminem has clever wordplay, but you can't really relate to him. He's corny and this and that. But I think that Eminem is one of the best storytellers in hip hop. He paints vivid pictures. He's able to make you laugh, able to make you depressed, able to make you, angry and all that kind of stuff. So he's able to touch on all kinds of emotions, and that's a reflection of his skill. But I have to go since I'm limited to 15 minutes on this phone. So with that, I'll say peace and blessings. Tell me what you think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.